Okay,
So a lot has
Rabbi.
happened since those years. And in fact, I wasn't a rabbinical student at the time. I was getting a master's in rabbinic literature, but I was
Hmm.
taking classes with the rabbinical students, and it all wound up being, for when I went back to rabbinical school some years later. But a lot has happened since those days as students.
Yeah.
Uh, Now I'm looking at your bio that Google has provided me.
Oh, okay.
So please let me know like what is old, but it looks fairly current. So are you the spiritual leader at Ahavat Shalom at the moment?
Ahavat
Ahavat
Torah.
Torah.
Ah, okay, because it's telling me Ahavat Shalom. And I was like, Ahavat
Hmm.
Shalom, that's in
Well, maybe
Northridge.
that's funny. I guess it merged. So I'm at Ahavat Torah, which is in LA, and then I'm also at Temple Har Shalom in
Yes, it tells me that too. So
Oh, so if
yeah,
you smush them together, they'd be
yeah.
Ahavat Shalom, but it's Ahavat Torah and Temple Har
Okay,
Shalom.
wonderful. All right. Well, you're the spiritual leader of Ahavat Torah and Har Shalom, Temple Har Shalom. You were for 6 years the vice president of community engagement at the Board of Rabbis of Southern California, which I benefited from directly. And you're here today to talk about your new book, The Viral Spread of Hope Finding Inspiration in
Ac-
Tough Times.
Actually, the one after that is the one
Oh,
that,
you there. Oh, I
yeah,
see. That was in 2022. So it's not your
yeah,
recent
yeah.
book. That was
So,
your, what is that your first book that I just
so
mentioned?
this is my fourth book.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and
We don't talk
don't worry.
enough.
Sorry. No, it's all good. So this one's called What Pain Teaches Us,
Yes.
Spiritual Lessons from 2 Years of Anguish. The
Okay.
Viral Spread of Hope was the third one.
Yes. Oh, I
And I
see.
can
It's
tell you
going
about that.
backwards in your all right, so I'm just gonna name the books here in
Sure.
reverse order because they're each one is wonderful. Finding inspiration in tough times. That's the viral spread of hope. Then before that was Castles and Catch, spiritual lessons uh, that children teach us. Uh, and I see that there's a picture here with your daughter and your son that I'm looking at. So it's incredible where we find our teachers. Uh, as Rabbi Jonathan Omerman used to say, sometimes our biggest challenges are our greatest teachers. So clearly, that is a resource for you. That was in 2015. Uh, and you also had Blessings and Baby Steps, The Spiritual Path of Parenting, 2011, and a regular contributor to the Jewish Journal. You have an honorary doctorate of divinity from the Ziegler School. Uh,
Yes,
Shkoyach,
thank
uh,
you.
for surviving 20 years in the rabbinate. And you also taught midrash at AJU at Ziegler, which is wonderful. You were ordained in 2001, and your husband is lucky to have you as his wife. Your husband, Tal, who is a franchise lawyer.
Yep,
You have two
very good.
kids. Now, this is telling me that your kids are 20 and 17. Is that the case?
So my daughter turns 18 on Friday. Yes, she's
Good.
currently 17, but only for a few more days.
Uh,
And my son is 21.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Mazal Tov to
Thanks.
them. Uh, I can go on. That gives me some information about you personally growing up in DC. And you've got great yichus. You're a wonderful human being. You were a wonderful student and clearly a fantastic rabbi, touching the Jewish people in all sorts of unique ways. I heard you deliver an outstanding sermon at Beth Am once upon a time. So your skills are many and varied, and it's an honor to welcome you here to share your thoughts and your book with us at Mishkan.
Thank you so much. As you know, I treasure your friendship, and we've been colleagues for so long. And actually, you are the reason that I'm at Temple Har Shalom in Idyllwild, because I remember when we sat in the same quadrant of synagogue at Temple Beth Am, that you had told me that you like to go hiking in Idyllwild on vacation. And so when I saw the position post there years ago for a high holiday rabbi, I was like, I know that he likes hiking there. I'm gonna apply.
Oh, great. I
So
actually
this is
used the
cute.
my Idyllwild coffee mug this morning.
Oh,
So
very nice.
it's still close to my heart. That's wonderful.
Very nice.
No, that's great.
That's interesting.
So yeah, I can share a little bit about the book and give an introduction, and then see what questions you have, and share a little bit. I'll give a little background on the books that came before it, just to have a sense of where the journey came from, but then I'll focus on this one. My first book went through pregnancy through preschool and spiritual lessons from those times, using Jewish texts. And then my second book went through the Torah 3 times with reflections on spiritual lessons children teach us, so mostly on parenting, from the years of elementary school to around high school. And then my third book, The Viral Spread of Hope, was really about the pandemic and the spiritual challenges of those years, and insights from my colleagues through the Board of Rabbis during those years about finding inspiration in difficult times. It goes through the Torah once, with a reflection on each parsha. And then this book is different. This is a book that I would have preferred not to have written, because it's an experience I would have preferred not to have had, because it's about an illness that I had. It actually starts several years ago. It starts before my medical problem began, 3 weeks before. It starts with the suicide of the child of a very close friend of mine, who was close friends with my children. And so it starts at that moment of really spiritual and emotional anguish. And then coinciding with that, I went to my annual checkup that year, and they told me that I had a polyp on my cervix that needed to be removed to make sure that it wasn't cancer. So I had that procedure 3 weeks after the funeral of that child. And thankfully the polyp was not cancerous. But something went awry in the procedure. It was supposed to be a minor procedure. Maybe you're a little sore the next day, but not a big thing. And I was in so much pain the next day that I was in the hospital. And I couldn't sit down, which meant that I was essentially disabled and homebound, because if you can't sit down, then you can't drive a car or even ride in a car. So suddenly I was limited to my home and as far as I could walk. And they didn't understand why I was in this pain. My gynecologist had been a doctor for 20 years, and she was stumped. And so in the subsequent months, I had to figure out solutions through a process of elimination. And so for 5 months, I was trying different medical solutions that were not working, and therefore eliminating certain things. So at first they thought it was a nerve. I had 3 nerve block procedures that didn't work, so it wasn't a nerve. Then they thought maybe it was the bladder, so I had 7 bladder procedures, none of which worked, and so it wasn't the bladder. So that was the unfortunate game that was playing thereafter. Until I ended up 5 months into that, I got COVID, and even though I was vaccinated and boosted, because my body was so run down from the 5 months of pain, I ended up in the hospital for a week having trouble breathing. And the doctor there told me if I was getting to the end of Western medicine's ability to solve this problem, then I should try Eastern medicine. And so I was taken by ambulance to the East West Medical Center that does both Eastern and Western medicine. And then my journey continued from there, and it took me through many different things. If you name it, I tried it. Reiki, medical, massage therapy, Chinese, massage, everything. You name it, I tried it. And it took me on this journey of both Western and Eastern medicine and all sorts of different healing modalities. And eventually, 2.5 years after the procedure, I was able to be out of pain. It was a very slow process, but now I'm entirely out of pain, thankfully, thanks to my healers. Thanks to God. And the book is reflections that I wrote along the way about the lessons that I was learning spiritually and otherwise from everything that was happening. And since I'm a rabbi and view the world through the prism of Jewish text, it's full of Jewish text and insights from our tradition. The texts are, in this book, it's a memoir, and the texts are woven in as they relate to the experiences. But there is an index in the back. So if you're looking for a particular Torah portion and you want an insight on that Torah portion, it'll show you where it appears. It doesn't cover every parsha because that wasn't the goal. The goal was just to share the texts that were resonating with me as I went through, and the way that it transformed my perspective on life and on the various lessons that I learned along the way. And the goal of the book is to share those lessons in case that they are helpful to someone else. We can't, if I could have undone this experience and have it not happen, I would have done that at any moment, but we can't do that. So all we can do is share what we learned and hope that it is helpful to someone. And I'm really grateful for all the help I received along the way. It was very much like an escape room, where you're locked in the room and that you have to get clues and solve the puzzle, and each little piece sends you to the next clue, and then you try the next clue until eventually you're able to emerge. So it was very much that type of experience where each healer or each treatment or each experience got me one step closer to eventually getting out.
Rabbi, are you going to talk about the specific thing that really did the trick? Or are you saving that for your talk?
Well, there wasn't one thing that did the trick. There were many things that together did the trick. There was one turning point was a doctor in Northern California called David Weiss, who himself had pelvic pain. He couldn't sit down for 20 years. And he invented a device with which and a methodology with which he cured himself. And he conducts monthly workshops up in Northern California about that. But it was that plus medical massage therapy plus Chinese medicine, Reiki, cold, heat. It was not one thing. It was actually in addition to Western medicine. So it was many things, and a very slow journey out, with several turning points along the way, but there was not one thing that fixed it. And actually there's a story in the Talmud, where a man is going to a town and he asks a kid for directions. How do you get to the town? And the kid says, well, there are two ways you can get there. There's a short way that's long and a long way that's short. And so he goes on the short way that's long. So he starts walking on the short route, and then when he gets there, there are a bunch of bushes and he thickets, and he can't cross through. So he comes back and he says, you told me this was the short way. And the kid said, yeah, but I also told you it was long. And he ends up going the long way that was short, because that was the way he could get there. And for me, that felt analogous to Western and Eastern medicine, that Western medicine seemed like the short way, medicine or nerve block procedure, it seemed like a simpler thing, but actually was much longer than it appeared, because if I took medicines, they would help, but they would also take away my strength. So if I couldn't function, then that was longer, and it would take me a long time to get my strength back. Whereas Eastern medicine was the long way that was short. It was very gradual, stretches and, treatments, and, very slow, but ultimately shorter than Western medicine for me. But I needed both of them. And the journey took me through many different healing modalities, each of which are their own chapter, and each of which had their own lessons that came out of them, spiritually as well as practically. Yeah, so I was always hoping for the one thing that would open the door that I would get out, but it wasn't like that. It was very slow. So that's the arc of what the book is about, and I can read a little bit perhaps from the introduction if you're interested, or I can open it up to questions and see what questions you have.
I would hope you would read some of the really pertinent chapters
Sure.
that are really
okay. So I'll read the introduction, because I think it sets the tone for what the book is about, and then we can see what questions you have. Okay. Introduction. This is a book I would rather not to have written, because it's an experience I would have preferred not to have had. If I could rewind the last 2 years and prevent this all from happening, I would do so in a heartbeat, but I can't. So all I can do is tell you what happened and what I learned from it, just in case this could be of help to you. The past 2 years have been the worst time of my life. Unfortunately, I've gone through many hard periods at different points in my life. The contest for the worst time of my life is not an easy one to win. But the past 2 years won that competition by a landslide. Hands down, no contest. It was the worst experience I have ever gone through. The Babylonian Talmud, a collection of rabbinic stories compiled in the 6th century, retells the following story. A rabbi named Rabbi Chia, son of Abba, fell ill, and Rabbi Yochanan went to visit him. Rabbi Yochanan asked him, "Are your sufferings dear to you?" Rabbi Chia bar Abba replied, "Neither them nor their reward." Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Chia bar Abba, "Give me your hand." Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave Rabbi Yochanan his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan raised him up. I love this poignant interchange. I especially appreciate Rabbi Chia bar Abba's honesty. When asked whether he values his suffering, he categorically says, "Hell no." He wants out of suffering. If there's any reward for the suffering, he'll pass. He doesn't want the suffering or anything positive that could come out of it. He wants out. That's all Rabbi Yochanan needed to know. He simply replied, "Give me your hand," and raised him up. But the story doesn't end there. Rabbi Yochanan later fell ill, and another rabbi named Rabbi Hanina went to visit him. Rabbi Hanina asked Rabbi Yochanan the same question that Rabbi Yochanan had asked Rabbi Chia bar Abba. "Are your sufferings dear to you?" Rabbi Yochanan gave the same answer, "Neither they nor their reward." Rabbi Hanina said, "Give me your hand." Rabbi Yochanan gave him his hand, and Rabbi Hanina raised up Rabbi Yochanan. Then the rabbis of the Talmud asked, why couldn't Rabbi Yochanan raise himself? Rabbi Yochanan was such a powerful healer to Rabbi Chia bar Abba, so why couldn't he just work the same treatment on himself? The rabbis answered, the prisoner cannot free himself from jail. How true. Even the greatest heart surgeon in the world can't perform surgery on themselves. So too, the rabbi couldn't heal himself. How fitting that the rabbis use the metaphor of a jail. Indeed, excruciating pain and illness is a prison, and none of us has the key to our own cell. We need others to unlock the gates and let us out. I learned this text 21 years ago from my colleague, Rabbi Sarah Berman, a wonderful rabbi and chaplain, while we were in rabbinical school together. This text struck me as powerful at the time, but now it resonates so much more with me because I've lived this text over the past 2 years. I couldn't agree more, both with Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan. My sufferings are definitely not dear to me, neither them nor their reward. Indeed, if I could have prevented going through the excruciating pain of the past 2 years, I would have done so in a heartbeat. If I could have gotten out of my prison of pain sooner at any point along the way, I would have done whatever it took to escape, but I couldn't. I had been a rabbi for 20.5 years when my pain and illness began. In these excruciating months, my spiritual training wasn't much help to me. Like Rabbi Yochanan, I was dependent on others, my doctors, nurses, medical massage therapists, spiritual director, colleagues, family, friends, and community, who together pulled me out of the prison. It wasn't as quick as in the story with the rabbis. No one person could unlock the door and let me out right away. Rather, it was more like being trapped in an escape room, where each person was part of a team effort. Each friend, therapist, doctor, nurse, ambulance driver, or community member would solve one piece of a puzzle, which would lead to the next clue, which opened the door to the escape room just a tiny crack further, until the door opening was wide enough for me to squeeze my body through it, inch by inch. I wasn't free one day in one fell swoop, but extremely slowly, at the pace of a snail, I eventually emerged. Some days I thought I had gotten out, only to find a new locked door. But slowly I was pulled out into the sunlight by the care of medical professionals and the love of family, friends, and community. I'm eternally grateful to each person who solved a piece of the puzzle for me and who together with others set me free. I offer this book to each of you as a small token of my appreciation. None of us is free of the pain and sufferings of this life, which reaches each of us in turn. None of us can free ourselves from the prison of pain. All we can do is pay the kindnesses and love we have received forward to others. Like Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Yochanan, my sufferings are not dear to me. I would gladly give back the pain along with any lessons that I learned from it, but I can't. What I can do is thank those who freed me from the prison of suffering and share the keys I was given, hoping to unlock the prison cell doors for someone else, maybe even for you. That was the introduction. Do you have questions? Reflections?
Oh, I'm curious to hear what are some of the lessons you learned from the pain.
Yeah. So that's what the whole book is about. There are a bunch. I would say, first of all, I learned the importance of community in a different way. and the importance of sharing my experience. My first instinct in this was not to tell anyone, and just to power through. So for the first 5 months of this, the only people who knew about my condition were my immediate family, and you know, the medical professionals that were involved in what was going on, and my employer. You know, I was only telling people when I couldn't get away with not telling them, and just hoping to power through it. And then 5 months in, when I landed in the hospital for a week, that's when word got out more broadly. And the community of Temple Beth Am sent out an email, and meals showed up at my house every day for 2 weeks. I've never eaten as well in my life as I ate for those 2 weeks. And each person who brought a meal also brought advice and, you know, talked to me. And it was really remarkable to me because of the pandemic, I actually hadn't stepped foot in Temple Beth Am in several years prior to that, because we were not going to synagogue, you know, so you know, we were taking seriously the isolation orders. And so even though I hadn't been to Temple Beth Am in several years, the outpouring of support was tremendous. And, you know, I've lived my whole life in Jewish community. As a kid, the synagogue was a block from our house, and the synagogue was really an extension of our house. And I've lived my whole life in Jewish community, worked for Jewish community, but there's something very different when you fall apart and the community comes through for you. So that taught me the power and value of the community in a different way, that going to shul is kind of like AAA insurance, but not for your car, but for yourself. That when you fall apart, they'll help pick you back up. So that was one of the lessons that came out. Another, you know, and the piece of it of wanting to pretend that everything was okay, wanting to power through, wanting not to share what was going on, that I had to override my instincts in order to accept help, which was very difficult, and also very difficult, you know, reversing the roles of going from, you know, I immediately went from taking care of my children to my children taking care of me. The kind of shift that might happen in a parent-child relationship over decades took place within a couple days, because when I was isolating with COVID at home, I could no longer feed myself, and my son needed to feed me. I was walking with a walker, and with difficulty even doing that. So, you know, having to ask for and receive help, and the challenge of that. Another lesson that came out was about the spiritual dimension. In the beginning, I was only focusing on the physical effects of healing, the physical processes of healing, and not the spiritual dimensions. And I had a Reiki session by Zoom. So it was not physical at all, because the person was not in the room with me. And I really didn't think it was going to work, but I was willing to try anything. So I had a Reiki session by Zoom, and where she was praying with me. And the next day I could drive, which I hadn't been able to drive for 10 months prior. I was able to sit enough to drive the next day. So one of which was, you know, the most direct experience of prayer, of the healing power of prayer that I've ever experienced in my life. So there was a shift in recognizing the spiritual dimensions of healing, not only the physical ones, and how those two intertwine. So those are a few of the lessons that come to mind, but every chapter is a lesson that resulted from a certain episode in that, a certain chapter of what was happening in that part of the healing process.
Could you say a little bit more about the spiritual? I mean, draw that out a little bit about what you're talking about.
So one of the things I write about the seen versus the unseen. One of the pieces of this was that they did a lot of medical imaging on me, and all of it came out normal. And part of what happens when all of your imaging comes out normal is that the medical professionals think, okay, you must be fine. The pictures look normal, therefore you must be fine. Notwithstanding the fact that I could not sit down and could not function. And one of the doctors at the East West Medical Center, Dr. Shuboff, who was really the person who finally diagnosed what had happened. What he diagnosed that had happened was that due to the pain of the polyp removal procedure, all the muscles in the lower half of my body seized up in order to protect me, and then they couldn't release. And so all of the treatments, the medical muscle massage, swimming, stretches, trigger point, like everything was about trying to get the muscles to release. And he mentioned that what the imaging doesn't show is the muscles. And that the muscle pain is actually the worst type of pain, that actually labor is a muscle pain. And the imaging doesn't show that. So the idea that what you can't see can be more powerful than what you can see, which is really the main thing in Judaism, is to say that, God, what we cannot see, is powerful, right? And we can see so much, but there's something that we can't see that is powerful. And we have the text where God says, you can't see me and live. You can only see my back, right? In the Torah. And so that was a turning point for me, because in the first months, I only looked for Western medicine and I only looked for physical solutions, and wasn't focused on Eastern medicine and or spiritual solutions that ended up being pivotal along with the other stuff, but ended up being pivotal in my healing. And also one of the lessons that came up, is really from that diagnosis, that the pain of the polyp removal caused all my muscles to tense up in order to protect me, but that tensing up only caused more pain. And I think that and I had to accept a great deal of pain in medical trained muscle massage and stretches and all of this. I had to accept a lot of pain in order to get the muscles to calm back down. And there were two different types of pain, the pain that just caused more isolation and the pain that was related to healing. And I think that process of what happened to me physically also happens spiritually to me and in general, that when we're in a painful situation, our instinct is to tense up and to isolate ourselves from others and to not tell anyone and to try to power through and to try to pretend that everything's okay. But that instinct only leads us to more pain and more isolation. And only when we're willing to accept the pain of pushing of grappling with the problem, only then can we get to healing. And I'll give an example. During that same time, I had two friends who at the time were both living in Ohio, the only two people I knew in the entire state of Ohio. One was Muslim, one was Jewish, and their children were bullying each other at school. They were in the same school, and one was bullying the other in a anti-Semitic way, and the other was bullying the other in a Islamophobic way. And both of the parents were friends of mine. They knew each other through me, over the years. And I offered to mediate that disagreement and try to bring some healing, but the mom wouldn't do it. She was in pain because her child was being bullied, and her instinct was to close up. She wouldn't talk to the other parents. She wouldn't talk, no, and she wouldn't do it. And I understood where she was coming from, but I felt it analogous to, our instinct is when we're in pain is to protect ourselves and shut ourselves off, but only if we take the risk of having a painful encounter is there the possibility of healing. And that seemed to me analogous to what I was going through and how I had instinctively told no one and just tried to power through until I couldn't, 5 months in. Whereas then I had to tell people, admit what was going on, work through the pain of all the different treatments, and allow healing to come on the other side.
I have,
So that's
oh,
part of
Linda
what
has,
the book is about.
oh, go ahead.
I love hearing you for the third time. I keep getting new angles of understanding what you went through. And it's, of course, all of us have had periods in our lives, if you live long enough, that have been parallel in some ways.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued this time by hearing, and I have your book and I'm sure I read it, the fact that a child committed suicide, you said right before you went through this. Yeah. I can only imagine that this also tightened your muscles without your knowing inside your body. So that, I mean, who knows what the exact mechanism is, but I can't, it's impossible to think that didn't affect your emotional body as well as your physical body for quite some time.
Yeah. And, there's something, particularly painful about watching your children bury their friend.
Yeah.
I mean, there should be like a special word for it. It's so painful. And part of what happened, when that happened, my husband and I and both of my parents, my folks, my dad and my stepmom, each separately had a conversation with my children privately. And we each, not coordinating with one another. And we each told them the exact same thing, which was, if you're struggling, please tell us, whatever it is, we will go through it. We will be there for you, please, if you're ever struggling, please tell us. And somehow that actually got to me as well. And the night of the funeral, I couldn't sleep. And I ended up writing a letter to my husband in the middle of the night. And I actually sent it to him in the middle of the night so that I couldn't take it back. Because the truth was I was miserable and had been for a very long time. I had been working at the Board of Rabbis, which had wonderful things to it, like getting to know my colleagues better. But I had also, as a result, been on the front lines of the pandemic emergency, caring for all the rabbis for a nonstop series of emergencies for several years. And actually, prior to the pandemic, there was the fires. But during the pandemic, I was in charge of caring for 222 rabbis, as well as both of my children who were isolated in the house, and one of whom was terrified of the pandemic. The other one was struggling in school, and I was watching his classes to try to help him with geometry. And my husband was, at this table working 12 hours a day, helping all of his clients that were in emergencies due to the pandemic. So we were like an emergency control center for several years. And I had reached, and that suicide was really a turning point for me where I could no longer, I had just been trying to do everything that needed to be done and be there for everybody for several years. And I could no longer pretend that I was okay and contain my emotions. It just was a breaking point for me personally. And then 3 weeks later, the procedure happened, and the physical pain eclipsed everything else. But it, part of, and the book, the mom of the person who committed suicide is one of my best friends. And so she and I are walking each other through the suffering, where I'm in a prolonged illness for 2 years and she has lost her child. And we're, walking each other through that pain. And the book goes through, Esther is the child, goes through Esther's first yahrzeit and her second yahrzeit. And the second yahrzeit is so the book goes from the suicide to the first yahrzeit to the second yahrzeit. And then there's an epilogue thereafter. But at the second yahrzeit is when we had the unveiling that I officiated at, with my friend. And so it's walking that journey through it. And Esther had, prior to Esther's suicide, had come out as non-binary. And changed pronouns to they, and had been very brave in being honest about what Esther was going through. And that honesty and bravery is something that I come back to throughout the book, as was pretending to be okay and then having to admit I was not okay at all. That sense of the tension between wanting to power through and pretend that everything is all right, and having to admit that things are not all right, and being honest about that. And so that's kind of a thread that goes through the whole journey, because it was really, in addition to a physical one, it was also a spiritual, emotional one as well.
Rabbi, could you talk a little bit about your relationship with Hashem during this period? Were there some lessons you learned about your faith and your theology as you were going through this horrendous period?
So I talked a little bit about the unseen, and the spiritual dimensions of healing, and the way that the physical and the spiritual are intertwined, and that you can't fix the physical without also addressing the spiritual dimensions of the healing process. So certainly encountering God as a catalyst for healing, and that the healers in my life, and the partners that were on this journey with me, in my mind were angels who walked with me through this. My medically trained massage therapist really walked with me through 2 years of this, and was an angel to me. I will say, as it's important to note as background, that My father, I grew up in Washington, D.C. because my father is a Holocaust scholar, and he created the Holocaust Museum in Washington, which the museum and I grew up together. So I was 7 years old when it was just an idea, and he would draw it on a napkin. And then when we had architectural plans, and then the groundbreaking, and then the construction, and the museum opened when I was 22. So the museum and I, as I said, grew up together. And as a result, my father would often say things like, Rabbi Greenberg, my dad would quote Rabbi Greenberg, who said, nothing about God should be said that couldn't be said in front of burning children, which means theologically never to say anything that doesn't take into account suffering and the reality of evil in this world. And so my theology was always built on the premise that God does not intervene to protect people from harm. So part of what I've seen happen a lot to people is that when they go through a crisis like this, they also end up going through a theological crisis because they're saying, how could God let this happen to me? How could this be? Those kinds of questions. And so they lose God precisely when they need God the most, because their theology has some major flaws in it in not accounting for the reality of evil in the world. I didn't have that experience. I never once thought, why is God letting this happen to me? Because my theology was built on the foundation of taking into account the reality of evil and suffering and all of those things in the world. So often these types of books include some kind of theological crisis, which I did not have. But it did deepen my relationship with Jewish texts, and my relationship with our tradition, as well as was the most direct experience I've had of the healing power of prayer, and the potential of the way that God acts as a catalyst for healing and for the way in which we as people help heal one another. Certainly, Dr. David Weiss in Northern California, he's older, once he healed himself, he doesn't have to run these workshops every month, but I see God as the catalyst that inspires him, for example, to keep giving these workshops, and to help heal people with what he has learned. And that helps us pull each other out, unlock the gates to pull each other out of prison.
I have a question. Did you run into doctors not taking you seriously and did they suggest it was psychosomatic, and did you have to battle that as well?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say that, I think this procedure should have been done under anesthesia. It's not normally done under any kind of pain relief at all. It's just done. And so first of all, I think this could have all been prevented, had the procedure been done differently, in terms of the way that women's suffering is not taken seriously enough to prevent it. I can't imagine that this type of, men don't have cervixes, but I can't imagine that this type of procedure, one wouldn't envision having a colonoscopy without anesthesia. And this is a similar thing. So to begin with, I don't think it should have happened the way that it did. Secondly, yes, my doctor, my gynecologist who did the procedure, came to visit me in the hospital the next day, said that she was stumped, referred me to a nerve block person, and and then exited the picture. So I then had to do the medical research and the process from there. And yes, there is, as I stated, when the imaging all comes back normal, and when all the tests that they can do all come back normal, then the doctors tend to give up rather than seeing it through. I mean, no one directly said to me, this is in your head, but they would just say, well, all your imaging everything looks normal to us. I'm like, okay, but I can't sit up, and and I need to be able to do that. So there was an undercurrent of pain not being taken seriously, and women's pain not being taken seriously enough to prevent it, and also enough to address it. And, sort of the struggle of not knowing is the hardest part. If you have a diagnosis, even if that diagnosis is bad, you know what it is, and you have some sort of avenue to proceed. But if you don't have a diagnosis, and I had 5 months before I had an accurate assessment of what happened, then it's horrendous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. One is really short. What was the name of the doctor at the East West Medicine Center that gave you this diagnosis?
Andrew Shubov.
Can you spell that, please?
Yeah, the last name is Shubov.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just ordered your book, and imagine that there are hundreds of thousands of millions of people who would benefit from learning about your journey, because most of us by our age have had one or another health issue that seems like a medical mystery. And rarely do people go through the level of perseverance that you did. And so you uncovered this vast treasure trove of resources. I did order the book, but do you list the specific resources as a kind of pragmatic primer in the book, number one? But number two, as you've been speaking about your book to various groups, what kinds of feedback, follow-up stories have you gotten from people who really felt empowered by your writing?
Yeah, so the first answer is essentially yes. There are a couple of my healers who, for various reasons, I had to keep anonymous, in terms of getting their permission to use their name and whatnot. But the main ones are listed, and if there are even the ones whose names are not listed in the book, if you want to email me, I'm happy to share who they are. I refer people to them often. They just didn't want their name in print for various reasons. But most of the main ones are in there. And, I'm happy to put you in touch with the Reiki person, the Chinese medicine, the medical massage, and I'm referring congregants regularly. The book, Dr. David Weiss, who is up north, his website is pelvicpainhelp.com. His book is Headache in the Pelvis. Dr. Andrew Shubov of the East West Medical Center had me read, he said, oh, you should read Headache in the Pelvis by Dr. David Weiss. And when I read the book, I then started looking online and realized that he did these workshops in Northern California. So I traveled to Northern California to go to it. So that's the answer to the first part. The second part, I've been sharing it with the congregations that I have you know, some kind of connection with. You know, I self-published it and through Amazon, and have been sharing it with the congregations that I'm connected with in some way. There has been a lot of really positive feedback and positive dialogue. You know, my prior books, which I'm grateful for, are geared towards particular audiences, like parents of children in, you know, pregnancy through preschool. Well, that's a pretty like narrow thing of parents of toddlers, right? But as you mentioned with this, you know, once you get past a certain age, everyone has grappled with some kind of pain or is a caregiver to someone who is grappling with some kind of medical issue. And so the dialogue that has come from it and the sharing of resources that have come from it has been very powerful.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Yasher Koach. Just a beautiful presentation. Can you show us the book? Can you
Sure.
show us the book?
Sure. It's swimming, because I had to swim every morning as part of my treatment. So it has, and that's also sort of the Psalm verse, from the depths I've called to you. So this is from the depths calling out. So yeah.
Where did you swim?
I swim at LA Fitness at Bundy. Usually around 5 a.m. because I couldn't sleep, and that's when they open. And I have a you know, I have a group of fellow 5 a.m. swimmers who were with me on this journey, and one of them, I'll say, I acknowledged them in the acknowledgments, and I gave them copies once I published it. And one of them, the couple that swims next to me in the lane over there, he's a pastor, retired now. But I didn't realize, you know, when I was swimming, I would repeat in my mind, you know, El Narafana La, you know, God heal her, as well as, you know, Mina Metzer Karatia, you know, I called out to you from a narrow place, and you answered me with a wide place. So I would repeat a lot of songs from the Psalms in my head, and I didn't realize that the person next to me, one lane over, she also recites Psalms in her head as she's swimming, and I didn't know that. So I think King David would be very happy that all these years later, people are saying the Psalms at LA Fitness at Bundy. So who knew?
That's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Okay.
This was great.
Thanks, everybody.
It was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
And
you.
you can
Spread the
order the
word.
book on you can order the book
Thank
on
you.
Amazon or
Yeah.
wherever. All right,
Amazon.
wonderful.
Really
Yep.
beautiful, and refuah shlema.
Thank you. Well, I'm healed now. Thank God.
Yes, I know, but you know, like the continued, like it feels
Yeah.
like this is part of the shlemut of making.
Oh yeah.
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 Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Happy
everyone.
Sunday.
Bye.
Thank you,
Okay,
Rabbi.
bye-bye.
Good job.
Thank you, Phil, for putting this together.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.